years of blood and tears had ended in resounding victory. Australia joined her allies in an outburst of rejoicing, the like of which her cities had never seen before. The pent-up emotion of 6 years poured out as a flood. Freedom was really theirs. This day of victory meant loved ones would now be safe. Families once again reunited to enjoy the things for which their men and women had fought. So let's go mad for one unforgettable day.
The most devastating and destructive war the world ever endured had finally come to an end. 80 years on, we explore how this turbulent period reshaped Clarendon, and through resilience and determination, it rose from the shadows of war, stronger and hopeful for a brighter future. The effects of the First World War and the impact of the Depression were beginning to fade. Electricity came to Clarendon in 1937, and not long after, Mount Bold Reservoir was completed, securing Adelaide's water supply. There was an air of optimism and innocence.
Dear Possum, our garden is looking lovely now the roses are out. 2 of the prettiest roses we have are Shot Silk and Lady Battersea. I have just planted some dianthus and phlox, and I hope they grow. I wish to thank you for my certificates. I like drawing even if I don't get them published. I like the fun of it. Joan Harper, 13, Clarendon.
As the decade drew to a close, a devastating fire ignited just north of Clarendon. Fueled by extreme heat, strong winds and drought, the fire tore through the southern vales, destroying homes and livelihoods in its wake.
I remember the fires very, very vividly. The houses that got burnt down. The fires just went on and on and on because there was nothing to put them out.
The devastating fires of 1939 would prove to be a dark and ominous sign of things to come, as the rising tensions in Europe boiled over into all-out war.
Fellow Australians, it is my melancholy duty to inform you, officially, Australia is also at war.
This 1931 photo of the Clarendon Apple packing class includes 7 boys who served in the war. Tragically, not all of these boys would return. On the 23rd of August 1941, Clarendon received news of its first casualty. Stuart Formby enlisted in the Army on July 15, 1941, joining the 18th Australian Light Horse Machine Gun Section at Woodside. On August 23rd, while heading home on leave, he fell ill on the train. Taken off at Blackwood, he was transported home by lorry. Dr. Wilton of Clarendon called an ambulance, but it took over 2 hours to arrive from Wayville. It was too late, as Stuart had already passed. Coroner Giles ruled that he was treated inhumanely due to inadequate care before his death. Both Dr. Wilton and Coroner Giles had sons from Clarendon in the war.
Ron Easton was born in Clarendon. He went to Clarendon Primary School. His mate Peter Piggott, they were the only 2 boys in his class through school.
Peter Piggott enlisted in the Royal Australian Air Force on the 12th of October 1940. He earned his wings and became a sergeant pilot in Rhodesia. There he married Vera Southwell before leaving for England in October 1941. While serving with the 55th Operational Training Unit, his Miles Master plane collided mid-air, leaving no survivors.
You had 2 little boys from Clarendon School, one family grieved and the other welcomed their son home from the war. So that hit him, I think, of having his school friend having died during the war.
Ron and Doug, when they turned 18, they had to enlist.
And with that, he went to Darwin prior to the bombing. He was on a troop train. He said it was utterly disgusting, the troop trains. He was virtually in a cattle truck. He said a lot of the battalion, the boys had dysentery.
On the 19th of February 1942, Darwin came under attack.
Ron said that when the planes came in, they were so low that you could see the faces of the Japanese pilots. He was given approximately 18 bullets. that was his ration to defend Australia, and some of the others weren't given much more.
Dad was very worried back when word came through that Darwin had been bombed, and we knew that Ron was in Darwin. He was a bit upset about all that.
Ron was part of the militia, and then they were given the option to sign up in the battalion as AIF.
Ron didn't want Doug to transfer because if they both got killed, with some of our relations had got killed in the First World War. So Ron thought that would be better if they didn't both be in the AIF and both get sent to the islands, and Singapore was in a bad way at the time.
And the majority, 99% of the men enlisted because they could see the emergency that was because of the bombings, and they knew Australia was in deep trouble.
After Darwin was bombed, even communities as far south as Clarendon feared invasion. Restrictions were enforced and defences strengthened.
All the signs, if nothing said Clarendon, all the signs were taken, so nothing to indicate where we were. So. Barbed wire down the main street, both sides on the footpath there was barbed wire, and there was barbed wire entanglements down on the bridge, and of course there's the holes that were drilled in the bridge ready to blow the bridge up.
Stationed in Clarendon to protect the bridge was Private Dean Hollett. He caught the eye of local lady Mary Spencer.
Yeah, when Dad was stationed here at Clarendon in the army camp, he met my mother, and it developed from there, so yeah.
He fell for her charms, and after the war, they married and began their life together in Clarendon, raising their 5 children. Clarendon primary school children also contributed to the efforts.
And of course, trenches were dug over opposite the school, other side of Potter Road. And you sometimes had air raid drills, and you all had to tear out and get in these trenches and things. Of course, the pipeline was a big attraction. It was only water for Adelaide. And then they had some gun emplacements built around because they were frightened that the enemy was going to come in from that way.
Probably my first memory of the war when I was very young, and we would see the searchlights in the sky, and that has really stood out in my memory, those big white lights in the sky. And he just told me they were looking for enemy planes.
Well, the authorities were quite convinced that the enemy was going to come land at Victor Harbour or Port Elliot down there because of the sheltered waters, and so they had these communication sections between Victor Harbour and Keswick where they used to send messages with Morse code, of course. And the story all goes that there was a big confusion once. It was a moonlight night, and a windmill close by somewhere there, and the windmill was slowly turning, and they thought it was people sending messages. But how much truth is in that, I really wouldn't know. But you can see it happening, We all had to have abalone. We weren't allowed to have any lights in our houses shining, had to have blackouts on everything. And any cars that were around had to have their headlights and that blacked out, sort of. It was fairly serious sort of thing at the time, particularly when Darwin got bombed.
Before enlisting on the 5th of July 1940, Clarendon farmer Cecile Smart ran a successful Jersey stud and was an enthusiastic sportsman, excelling in football and cricket. As part of the 2nd 48th, he left for the Middle East on the 5th of February 1941. Cecil fought in the First Battle of El Alamein, a key turning point in the North African campaign. Tragically, he was killed in action on the 13th of July 1942, leaving behind his wife, Pearl, and their 2 sons, Peter and John. Another champion apple packer to join the war effort was Jack Frisbee on the 6th of December 1941. He began pilot training in Australia before travelling to Canada, where he earned his wings. In mid-1943, he was deployed to the UK.
That's where most of his career was centred, in 70th Squadron in England, and going down to Italy to Foggia But he told me about the number of times that caught in searchlights and the basic action that you had to take to get out of them. You always hoped that you got rid of your load, your bombs, at that stage because of the swerving and all that sort of thing. Plenty of flak, he told me, a number of holes because it was only a canvas base. A lot of people don't understand a wimpy bomber was largely canvas around a wooden structure. So they were very game to fly them when you reflect on it.
I was able to actually get in touch with his rear gunner, a guy named James. They used to call him Junior. I spent a couple of days with him, and he lived and breathed the war, and he told me stories of Dad as the pilot bringing them home, you know, from night missions and losing motors, and Dad was his hero. And he often spoke of his admiration for his flying skills, and you know, in those days, rear gunners' longevity wasn't great, but he was able to get through the war. He didn't talk about it a lot. I did ask him one question once, which was interesting. I said, what was the worst memory of where you felt that you were in most danger in the war, thinking that it might be in a mission somewhere? He said, no. He said, oh, we were standing under the wing of the plane after a night mission one night, and the bomb aimer was messing around. And he pulled the thing and a live bomb fell out of the plane. Unfortunately, it didn't fall on its end and didn't go off. He said that was one of the scariest moments that he said he could remember.
Well, Clarendon Primary, he was a pretty keen student there, as I understand. He had a great mate there called Len Carr. They had many a time fishing up along the Onkbaringa. He was a great mate of his who unfortunately passed away in the war.
Len Carr was training to be a school teacher before the outbreak of war. But before he could take up his first appointment, he enlisted in the Royal Australian Air Force in 1940. He was posted to Cairns to pilot Catalina flying boats on bombing and patrol missions. On the 13th of April 1943, at just 23 years of age, Len was killed when his Catalina crashed near the entrance to Cairns Harbour. They had flown for 23 hours and 23 minutes and ran out of fuel after being unable to land due to severe weather conditions.
I didn't know Len Carr really because I was only a child, but his mother used to stand out at the gate just below the shop and watch the children go by, perhaps thinking of what could have been and should have been. Very sad.
Ron Giles enrolled into Clarendon Primary School in 1921. He had many hobbies, including amateur photography, rabbit breeding and coin collecting. He also had a beautiful lyric tenor voice, trained at the Elder Conservatorium. Ron enlisted in the Royal Australian Air Force in early 1940. After training in Victoria and South Australia, he qualified as aircrew and trained at Victor Harbour. Whilst swimming after completing his course, he broke his neck diving into shallow water. After 8 months in Plaster, he began flying at Parafield and later Deniliquin, where he earned his wings as a sergeant pilot, an impressive achievement given his primary school education. Ron travelled to England via America and was assigned to a Halifax bomber squadron. Whilst conducting an air-to-sea firing training exercise, his plane crashed in the North Sea on the 5th of June 1944, just one day before D-Day.
Uncle Max joined the army, and my understanding was that he was in that personnel carrier, got blown up, and he was ultimately repatriated back to Australia because obviously of the terrible wounds that he suffered. And then I think they patched him up and shipped him off to New Guinea, which is what they did in those days because they were so short of experienced soldiers. But he suffered terribly after the war.
Before the war, Alec Powell was a gardener. As well as being an expert horseman, he also played a fine game of football, being an excellent high mark and a grand exponent of the dropkick. Alec enlisted in 1942 with the 3rd Air Maintenance Company at the age of 40. He was deployed to New Guinea in July 1943. On his first day home on leave, he was stricken down with malaria and rushed to the 105th Australian General Hospital, later to be known as the Repat. Sadly, he passed away from the illness on the 24th of June 1944.
My auntie, who was Nita White, in 1940 she married Lindsay Loud, one of 3 boys, and his brother Merton went off to the war. And during the war, Merton used to write home to my auntie and his brother, of course, who he used to fondly call the boss. After my auntie died, when I was cleaning our house, I found in a drawer all these letters that were sent home from Merton. They were records of a local lad that grew up here, went to school here.
Merton's dream was to be a sailor. He volunteered in May 1940 and joined the Navy on May 15, 1942, just weeks after his 17th birthday. During his 58-month service, he sailed the 7 seas and visited most countries, surviving at least 13 naval engagements. His final operation was aboard the battleship Australia in the Lingayen Gulf, where he was killed in a kamikaze attack on the 5th of January 1945.
Merton died right at the end of the war. It was only several weeks after they got the news through that he had died that my auntie, who was the organist at the Methodist Church here in Clarendon, she came down and played for the wedding of my Uncle Ron Easton, and Elsie Nash, and she said that was a joyous occasion, and yet she knew that she had lost her brother-in-law in the war, and it was because they all grew up together and knew each other. That was a very sad time to go through.
He was on leave. The wedding was a little bit rushed.
Ron, for their wedding photos, they had to go down Dunley Road, and Eric Potter, in actual fact, took them down there in his car.
He had saved his wartime petrol ration. He was about the only person in Clarendon had a car.
And he got a puncher going across the train line at Blackwood, and we were all up there waiting for him to get him back for the reception. Like, there was a couple of hours wait, sort of thing.
And then Ron, after his wedding, he went to the Solomon Islands. So they hadn't been married for very long before she got the telegram he was wounded. But the Japanese soldier rolled a grenade over the mound onto the Australian side, and at that stage Ron had shrapnel wounds, mainly to the back, but miraculously nobody was killed, and Ron just said it was just a miracle.
Fellow citizens, the war is over. The Japanese government has accepted the terms of surrender imposed by the Allied nations, and hostilities will now cease.
Dad and I actually went to Adelaide the day before. It happened early in the morning. We'd gone to Adelaide to get some clothes and things, and everything went wild in King William Street and that sort of thing.
Peace had finally arrived. Many celebrations were held in Clarendon to celebrate the end of the war and to welcome home those who served. Peter Lloyd was 8 when the war ended. He fondly recalled marching through Clarendon's main street, banging a kettle drum in celebration. It was the happiest day of his life. His father, a wartime pilot, was finally coming home. The largest celebration came in 1946 to mark the 100th anniversary of the founding of Clarendon.
Well, the centenary event, I wasn't very old at the time, but it was a huge event for Clarendon, and I suppose everybody was a bit war weary.
I was down on the oval with Dad with the bullocks, but you can see us in the film.
The main thing I remember is the procession. There were lots and lots of different groups put in floats, and we went down the main street and to the oval. Lots of the primary school children were involved in nursery rhymes. My family decided to sing a song of sixpence. We won first prize.
Although the threat of war had passed, the struggles of rationing and shortages remained.
There you are, boys. It's the last round. You've had your issue. What? No more beer? Beer? Look at me cells, half empty. What the hell can we get? Oh, I'm fed up. No cigarettes, no beef, no beer. Eggs short, butter and meat rationed. It's all a racket.
And there was ration tickets that you had to get your supplies. Because I remember Dad and Mum saying, oh, we've got so many ration tickets over, so they'd swap someone else for some petrol tickets. to swap around, and people that were really in need, you helped them out, although you didn't have much.
Tyres were, well, they were push-bike tyres. You couldn't had to have ration tickets, to get those to come to school. We had to live over a mile from the school, otherwise you couldn't get a tyre for your bike. And then it took you 2 or 3 months to get them.
I do know that the men that came back from the war, the people that came back from the war, were only allowed to build certain size houses, very typically basic 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom houses, because there was lack of building supplies and lack of builders.
He and my mother made all the bricks for their house, which is opposite the Clarendon Primary School up there, a White House as it used to be called.
When he renovated it, they were making their own bricks and that in a mould, and they'd do their work during the day and then they'd make bricks when they got home from work, so yeah.
The transition from military service to civilian life posed many challenges to returned servicemen and women. Returned soldier Doug Richards of the 2nd 23rd lamented the fact that he was old enough to be drafted, yet not old enough to enjoy a drink at the local watering hole, the Royal Oak Hotel. The war upended lives, leaving many soldiers struggling to resume their paths, or to even create new ones. Jack Frisbee dreamed of becoming a teacher, but family obligations would lead him in a different direction.
Grandfather, who was a local butcher here, Horace, as it was called, or Les is known to many people, and Dad essentially, when he came back from the war, joined the business, much against his will. Worked in it probably up until the early mid-70s.
After the war, Clarendon welcomed many new families, seeking to rebuild their lives. Their contributions broadened and enriched our community. Among them were newlyweds, Don and Nikki Crace.
Don and Nikki Crace ran the local store here in Clarendon. He was in the Air Force, and that's probably why Dad and he struck up a really close relationship. In fact, I can tell you that Don and Dad were very close to opening up a supermarket in Clarendon. They had the plans of the supermarket. The butchering business was going to be part of the supermarket as well. Two forward-thinking guys as to what the future might be at Clarendon from the local store point of view. Nikki Crace, of course, who we all know very well, a wonderful lady, she was almost the local nurse. Because of her nursing background during the war, she certainly attended me and Greg and my sister Michelle when she had a bad illness at one stage. They both contributed heavily to the local community.
After surviving the war and building a life for himself and his young family, in a tragic twist of fate, Don Crace passed away on the 16th of August 1959 at only 34 years of age.
It was a very sad time because he was only a very young man. The locals of Clarendon all knew each other and cared about each other, and very much it was felt by the town.
Sport provided a great outlet for many of the young men who returned from the war. Many ex-servicemen joined the Clarendon football team, including star player and coach Jack Frisbee.
Dad was a prolific sportsman. He could turn his hand to anything, be it from tennis to cricket to football. In those days, the local community was very big into sport. Cricket-wise, it's pretty similar. Memorable 350 not out on the Clarendon Oval one afternoon. Not that Clarendon Oval was the biggest oval in the world. Dad was a fabulous sportsman, there's no question about it. And my personal view is if the war hadn't come along, he could have achieved anything.
The Clarendon War Memorial was built in 1920 to honour those who served in the First World War. The unprecedented trauma of the Second World War would inspire the creation of many more heartfelt tributes.
When they opened the library, they also had commissioned a memorial pedestal for the soldiers who died in World War II, and on it was the memorial book. Every day we were supposed to turn a page. We treated it very reverently at the time, and then it got lost. We found a photo of it, and Phil's group made a perfect replica.
We have we call it our communion table, and I understand that it was the Giles's family table, and they gave that in memory of their son Ron Giles, and it's used in the church every Sunday.
In the years after World War II, Anzac Day participation declined due to war fatigue, shifting priorities, and changing attitudes toward war.
I used to attend with him to the memorial service held across the road, which was a whole heap different back in that era as to what it is now. And I can remember on a couple of occasions standing over there in the rain with a raincoat on and an umbrella, and there might have been 10 people there. That's what it was there for a number of years.
Attendance began to rise again in the 1980s and 90s, driven by renewed interest in Anzac history and national identity.
After one of his Anzac Day marches, we went to Brighton Metro. He was still wearing his medals from the Anzac Day march, and the girl behind the counter, she said, "Thank you for your service," and let him in free. And he thought that was, absolutely wonderful. He thought his Christmas had come all at once.
World War II left deep scars on Australia, reshaping families, communities, and the nation's identity. In the small country town of Clarendon, 50 young men would enlist. Of that number, 7 made the supreme sacrifice. Cities braced for invasion, rationing tightened belts, and women stepped into roles once thought unthinkable. The war reshaped Australia's place in the world, forging new alliances and shifting attitudes. 80 years on from the end of World War II, we honour those who sacrificed and served, so that we may have the privilege of calling Clarendon our home.